Get ready for a long journey back in time. Today, we're tackling a topic that stirs the minds of everyone interested in aviation history and the Second World War. This isn't just about dry facts. It's a story full of what-ifs and twists that will make you look at that aerial war in a completely new light. Make sure to read to the very end, because the most intriguing and controversial points are waiting for you in the finale. And let's agree right away. Your opinion is priceless. After reading, dive into the comments. Write down what you think, what you argue about with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our future investigations, because together we will be unpacking the most mysterious and controversial pages of history. Let's go. Imagine the spring of 1943. The Cuban steppes, the snow has just melted, the earth is damp and black. Somewhere down there, a hellish meat grinder is raging, guns are thundering, people are dying. And high in the sky, an altitude where the blue of the sky gives way to the almost black cosmic vacuum, a different war is unfolding. A war of speeds, maneuvers, and cold-blooded calculation. And it is into this sky that new aircraft with red stars on their wings climb. But their sound is not the familiar guttural bass of a Soviet engine, but a higher-pitched, almost melodic howl of a British Merlin. These are Spitfires, the legendary Spitfires, the symbol of unbending Britain, the heroes of the Battle of Britain. It would seem that the Soviet pilots who received such a machine should have been overjoyed. But things weren't that simple. Why didn't this winged legend take root on the Eastern Front? Why didn't it become as familiar as the Yak or the Lavochkin? Let's figure it out. And this will be a long but incredibly interesting story. To understand the essence of what happened, we need to take a huge step back and look at the big picture. The Second World War wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a clash of economies, logistical systems, and, most importantly, military doctrines. Economics and Lend-Lease. A lifeline or a drop in the ocean. Let's be frank. By the autumn of 1942, the Soviet Union was in the grip of a monstrous crisis. Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltics were lost, gigantic industrial and agricultural regions. The factories that had been miraculously evacuated to the Urals and Siberia were just beginning to set up production. There was a shortage of everything: steel, non-ferrous metals, machine tools, high-grade aviation gasoline, and, critically, complex technological components like aircraft instruments, radio transmitters, and high-octane fuel additives. It was in this situation that the Lend-Lease program, initiated by the USA but involving Great Britain, became more than just aid. It became a life support system. We often hear arguments. We could have managed on our own without the Allies, or conversely. We wouldn't have won the war without American stew and Studebakers. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. But in the context of aviation, the role of the Allies was absolutely critical at certain periods. The delivery of aircraft from Great Britain and the USA wasn't simply a case of they gave us some planes. It was an incredibly complex logistical operation. The northern convoys heading to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk suffered horrific losses. German submarines and aircraft were literally hunting every transport. Every Spitfire that arrived had been paid for with the blood of sailors. Understanding this is important. It wasn't some faceless import. This was a machine paid for with lives. And it, of course, was treated with a special attitude, a mixture of hope and skepticism. First contact, the flawless Invisible Man. The first Spitfires to arrive in the USSR weren't fighters. Back in 1942, as part of the infamous convoy PQ-18, Spitfires of the PR Mk.4 modification arrived. These were not warriors, they were spies. Photo reconnaissance planes. And in this role, they performed brilliantly. Imagine an aircraft stripped of all excess. No cannons, no machine guns, just cameras in the fuselage. Its trump card was altitude. The engine was specially modified to climb to altitudes where almost no one else could fly. Over 12,000 meters. For 1942, this was practically a cosmic altitude. The German Messerschmitt Bf 109s of the latest modifications at that time could barely reach it, losing maneuverability and controllability. It was on such a Spitfire reconnaissance plane that the Soviet pilot Leonid Yelkin made one of his most outstanding flights. September 1943. Norway, Alta Fjord. Deep in this winding, cliff-protected fjord lurked a giant, the nightmare of the British Admiralty, the battleship Tirpitz. The sister ship of the Bismarck, the pride of the Kriegsmarine. Finding it, photographing it, and remaining undetected was an almost impossible task. But Yelkin, in his high-altitude Spitfire, did it. He hovered where they couldn't reach him and took clear pictures. This information was priceless. It allowed British submarine forces and long-range aviation to plan an operation against the Tirpitz. Here it is, the perfect example of using technology for its intended purpose. Not trying to force it into a different role, but using its strong suit. And here the Spitfire scored a solid A+. It was the flawless invisible man, the eyes of the command. The fighter, the first disappointment. The 5 enters the battle. Now let's fast forward to the spring of 1943. The first fighter Spitfires, the Mk.VB modification, begin to arrive at the front. About 143 of them arrived in total. The anticipation among the pilots was sky high. A legend, the plane that shot down the best aces of Goering over the English Channel. Finally, we have a weapon to fight the elite squadrons of the Luftwaffe on equal terms. So, the plane is on the airfield. Externally, a beauty, elegant, streamlined shapes, a teardrop canopy providing excellent visibility. The pilots get into the cockpit, and here, the initial delight subsides a bit. Cramped? Not exactly, but unfamiliar. Instruments with inscriptions in English. Levers, buttons, everything is different from the native yaks. But then the first flight. Takeoff. And here, euphoria, pilots unanimously noted. Flying the Spitfire was incredibly simple and pleasant. It was obedient, as if reading your thoughts. In horizontal turns, it was perhaps the best of anything in the sky of the Eastern Front. It could outturn anyone in a carousel. Its armament commanded respect. 2 20mm Hispano cannons and 4 Browning machine guns of 7.7mm caliber. A second salvo, 3.54 kilograms of deadly metal. In this indicator, it surpassed both the Yak-9 and the La-5 at that time. It would seem here it is the ideal, but the very first battle with experienced German pilots put everything in its place. And the reason was not in the plane itself, but in the environment it found itself in. This is the key point to understand. Tactical failure. The wrong war at the wrong altitude. Let's imagine 2 different theaters of war. The Western Front, the Battle of Britain. The main task is to intercept bomber armadas flying at high altitude, covered by fighters. Battles take place at altitudes of 5, 6, 7,000 meters. Here, climb rate, the ability to quickly gain altitude, and engine power at the ceiling are important. The Spitfire Mk.VB was created precisely for this. It was a duelist, an aristocrat of the sky, fighting in clean space. The Eastern Front, the Kuban Battle, the Kursk Bulge. Here, everything is different. This is a war on the ground. The main task of the fighters is to cover their IL-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft, the flying tanks, which operate literally 100 meters from the ground, or to escort P-2 dive bombers attacking from an altitude of 1 to 1.5 kilometers. Accordingly, the main air battles rage at low and medium altitudes, from 1,000 to 4,000 meters. These are not duels. This is a melee, a knife fight where seconds count. And so the Spitfire, with its engine settings, its wing optimized for altitude, ends up in this meat grinder. And what happens? At an altitude of 3,000 meters, the newest German Bf-109G, or the formidable FW-190, had a speed advantage of 50, sometimes even 100 kilometers per hour. This is a colossal difference. The German could dictate the terms of the battle, attack, make a pass from a higher position, and if something went wrong, simply dive away. The Spitfire lost in the vertical. Its Merlin didn't provide the same responsiveness, the same sharpness that Soviet or German Daimler-Benz engines demonstrated at low altitudes. A paradox emerged. The Spitfire could outturn a Messer in a turning battle, but a skilled German pilot would never engage in such a carousel. He used his own tactics, hit and run. And against this tactic, the elegant Briton was almost powerless. The grind, the curse of the thin skin and the scattering bullets. Now let's descend from the heavens to the sinful earth. Literally. And here the Spitfire faced new trials. Landing gear. Its landing gear was designed for the smooth, billiard table-like concrete runways of British airfields. And what did the Soviet front have? Dirt strips, which in spring and autumn turned into mud, and in winter into ruts and potholes. The Spitfire, with its narrow landing gear track, was prone to kicking, nosing over, sticking its nose into the ground at the slightest unevenness. For Soviet pilots, accustomed to landing their yaks and loss on their bellies in a field, this was a serious drawback. All-metal construction. Seems like a plus. Stronger, more durable. But there was a flip side. Repairs. A punctured wooden fuselage on a yak could be patched up in field conditions by technicians and carpenters. A punctured derailleur sheet on a Spitfire required complex repairs, special rivets, and tools. In the conditions of a frontline workshop, this was a huge problem. Armament. Remember I talked about powerful armament? Well, there was also a huge problem. Its cannons and machine guns were spaced out along the wing. The machine guns were closer to the root. The cannons were further out. This meant that the trajectories of the bullets and shells converged at one point only at a strictly defined distance, usually around 200 to 300 meters. To effectively hit a target, you had to catch that exact distance. Soviet pilots, trained on centralized armament, all barrels in the nose, were used to firing from any distance, especially close range where spread didn't matter. For the Spitfire, at close range, the shells and bullets fanned out, and most of them simply missed the target. Retraining was needed, and there was no time for that in the heat of battle. All these little things added up to one big picture of disappointment. The plane was good, but it wasn't theirs. It didn't fit into the harsh, crude, down-to-earth reality of a war in the East. The second attempt, the ninth, the king of altitude, but not of the front. The British, seeing the problems of the five, sent a much more advanced machine, the Spitfire Mk.9. This was now a serious opponent even for the latest German fighters. From February 1944, 1,185 such machines arrived in the USSR. It had a more powerful engine with a 2-speed supercharger, which dramatically improved its high-altitude performance. The landing gear was strengthened, the aerodynamics were improved. Its capabilities were phenomenal. The high-altitude modification H.F.Mk.9 could climb to 13,100 meters. This was an unattainable altitude for any Soviet fighter at the end of the war, be it the Yak, 9U, or the La-7. It would seem, here it is, the turning point. But the Soviet command acted, in my opinion, brilliantly. It did not throw these celestial aristocrats into the trench frenzy of the front. The command conducted an analysis and made the only correct conclusion. The Spitfire Mk.9 was not a frontline fighter. It was a specialist, and its specialty was the air defense of large cities and strategic objects. And it was sent where it was truly irreplaceable, to the air defense regiments covering Moscow, Leningrad, Baku. Its enemy was not the maneuverable Focke-Wulfs, but the high-flying German reconnaissance planes, like the Junkers Ju-88S or special modifications of the Heinkel He-111, which could fly at the limit of the ceiling of Soviet fighters. And here the Spitfire found its true niche. On March 8, 1945, right at the end of the war, a pair of Spitfire Mk.9s from the Air Defense Forces intercepted and shot down just such a high-altitude reconnaissance plane near Leningrad, a target that others couldn't reach. In this role of a sky guard, an interceptor specialist, the Spitfire served faithfully and truly until 1948, and in some places until 1951. Historical analysis, in my opinion. Why didn't it become theirs? So what's the bottom line? Was the Spitfire a bad plane? Absolutely not. It was one of the greatest fighters of the war. But its relative failure on the Soviet-German front is a classic story about the right tool for the right job. This is the story of how a brilliantly designed aircraft for one military doctrine turned out to be suboptimal under the conditions of another. The Soviet aviation industry created machines for its own needs. Maximally simple, reparable, effective at low and medium altitudes, with centralized powerful armament for short and furious attacks. The Yak and the Law were the perfect tools for the war the USSR was waging. The Spitfire was a tool for a different war. A war for air superiority at high altitude. And when they tried to use it for something other than its intended purpose, the result was predictable. Now imagine an alternative history. What if the USSR had received the Mk.9 in large quantities not in 1944, but right away in 1943? Would it have changed anything? Most likely no, because the tactics and conditions of use would have remained the same. But it might have left a brighter mark in frontline aviation, not just in air defense. So that's the story. A story about a legend meeting harsh reality. A story about how even the most brilliant mechanism is powerless if it's used in the wrong place and at the wrong time. Friends, what do you think about this? Do you agree with this analysis? In your opinion, could the Spitfire, under different circumstances, have become as mass-produced and beloved on the front as, say, the American Aircabra? Write your thoughts in the comments. Let's argue. Let's discuss. This topic is endlessly interesting, and your opinion is very important to me. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you found this interesting. There are many more such deep and intriguing analyses ahead of us. Thank you for staying with me until the end.